Welcome to Inside the Game with CNHI Sports. I'm George Bremer, the Indianapolis Colts beat writer for CNHI Sports Indiana, and each week we will bring to you some of the hottest topics from college football, the NFL, the NBA, and the world of sports in general. We will go inside the game with experts on the beat. Should be a really fun time for everyone. In fact, let's get it started right away. We're going to bring in our first guest, Bill Burt from CNHI Sports Boston. Now we're joined by Bill Burt, who covers the New England Patriots for CNHI Sports Boston. And Bill, can you tell everybody how long you've been around the team out there in Foxborough?
Glad you asked. I am the only person on the beat who has covered every game that Bill Parcells coached and every game that Bill Belichick coached. So the three Bills, those two and me. So I've been covering the Patriots full-time since 91, so this is the 30th year, and Parcells started in 93. So, yeah, been through a lot. In fact, as crazy as it is, the first 10 years were as much fun, even though it wasn't winning. The winning wasn't there. It was as much interesting to write about as it has been, honestly, the last 20 years, which have been, historic. But I've been covering the team. I grew up in this area. The Patriots were one of my favorite teams as a kid. The 3-11 Patriots were one of my favorite teams from 1973. So I have a strong history. I cover all sports. I play sports, but football is sort of the beat that I cover the most. Wasn't a great football player, but loved the sport. And there is a fascination with this team. And, for literally 40 years, there's been a few blips where they've made runs, but they've been sort of the Cincinnati Bengals, if I can say that, of the NFL, literally like a stepchild for 40 years. And then things changed the last 20 years. So I have an interesting history. I do enjoy it. They're a tough team to cover. We don't get a lot of information, but it forces you to work, and you got to be creative. So,
this isn't necessarily football related, but as a Red Sox guy, as a Boston guy, how are you handling having a family member in the Yankees organization?
That question always gets asked to me lately. So I will tell you, for me, it doesn't really affect me at all. I'm fine. I still watch the Red Sox, and I like to see the Red Sox do well. My son, no, not so well, and. So that's going to be interesting how that plays out over the years. I know his dream would be to hit a grand slam over the monster to walk off to win the ALCS. So we'll see if that ever happens. And he wants to do it at Fenway. So what does that do? But it was interesting when he was drafted by the Yankees. But they pursued him in college, so it wasn't a total surprise. It didn't come out of nowhere. And when you're a kid, even like a guy like Brady in college, you just want to get drafted. You'll go to Tampa, you'll go anywhere. Be the Yankees, but it's been a great run for him so far. In fact, I was out to see him a couple weeks ago in Houston, which is where he's based out of right now, living with a couple of Yankees farmhands. So that's an interesting side of my life right now.
I can imagine. Another interesting aspect of your life right now has to be Cam Newton. What did you see Sunday? We talked already at the top about how long you've been around this team and how much football you've seen. What did you see on Sunday from the Patriots, and how unique was it in your experience around the team?
Yeah, this is going to be different, man. This is going to be different. He's a personality. He's different. A lot of people have watched him, including this guy right here, probably you too, and go, what's he doing? Like, why does he wear that? Why does he say that? But I will tell you, he is an appearance to be all in here. And with that, you sort of say, hey, that's his personality. He does what he does, but he's added a flair to this team that they haven't had. I will say this, he's got a little Gronk in him. Gronk was really the only player that could get away with being a goofball. And Belichick never really understood Gronk. He'd sort of shake his head. He'd want to say something to him. And, Gronk could dance by him, even hug him and pick him up. And this guy's got that little personality too. And on the field, it's different. Running quarterbacks. I mean, we have had literally the Colts and the Patriots have had two of the biggest statues at quarterback in the history of the NFL, even more so in the 50s and 60s, 70s, wherever. Brady and Peyton Manning, have been statues. And this is completely different. 3rd and 2. I wrote about it the other day. 3rd and 2 yesterday. First series, 3rd and 2. He runs the ball. 3rd and 2 used to be a pass to Edelman, 9 times out of 10. So it's going to be different around here. My thing with guys like him, is he going to be able to sustain running 15? No, not 15. But if he can run 10 times a game, maybe elude a few, maybe go back to pass and maybe find some open field for a first down, I think we'll accept that. But I'm telling you, it's different. And but he's being embraced here. The fans love him right now.
And in different times across the NFL, obviously in general, I know I haven't been doing this quite as long as you. In about my 10th year here with the Colts, and this offseason's unlike anything I've seen before. Even the strike year, at least there was a preseason. Training camp that year was crazy because there were free agents coming in the day of the first practice and things like that. But the preparation for week 1 was still there. You still had 4 preseason games. You still had a training camp that looked like training camp. This year, Philip Rivers in Indianapolis didn't walk into the team facility until July 24th. That's the first time he ever was in the city of Indianapolis around any of his teammates in any kind of official capacity. Were you surprised? I know I was a little bit. Were you surprised by how sharp some of the teams looked in week 1? I'm thinking Kansas City in particular. The Sunday night game seemed like it was a pretty cleanly played game. Did it surprise you at all that the teams were able to get up to speed as quickly as some of them were?
Well, that's one thing I thought with coming in. It's teams with superstar quarterbacks and coaches that have been around for 10, 15, 20 years, like Belichick, like Tomlin, like Harbaugh in Baltimore. Those guys, Andy Reid, he's been around a while. So those guys have been through a lot. Not they've been through this, because this is like a college season. That's one thing Belichick did his homework. Belichick talked to a lot of college coaches. I wrote this a couple months ago because that's what colleges do. They don't have preseason. They scrimmage against each other, and then they play a game. There's no exhibition games or preseason games. So was I surprised? No, because not all the teams looked good. I'm gonna say, yeah, probably. I think the execution was a little better, but I don't get a feel. Usually, you get a feel after 1 or 2 weeks. I think it's going to take like 3 or 4 weeks before I say that team is no good or that team is very good. I mean, there's a couple teams you can probably like Dallas looks like Dallas. I saw Dallas last night. They look like the same Dallas team I've seen the last 5 or 6 years. But that's what we're going to find out here. We're going to find out in about a month. We'll know, I think, where every team is. Usually, I can, after 2 weeks, say I can pretty much predict how many wins each team's going to get.
Yeah, I agree completely. It's going to be a month probably this year before you have a real firm grasp on how anybody's going. But with that caveat, did anybody surprise you this week in a positive way? And did anybody surprise you this week in a negative way, with the understanding that those answers may change very drastically in week 2?
Yes. So Aaron Rodgers, and I hate to say it because he's a superstar, he's a Hall of Famer, he's, quote, one of the greatest quarterbacks, one of the most athletic quarterbacks. That interests me because that was a good defense he went against, and he destroyed them, and he destroyed them through the air. And I thought that team was transitioning away from him. They drafted a quarterback in the first round. And I think, whoa, they're basically gonna do what Belichick did to Brady the last couple of years. We're gonna be more of a ball control team. You're gonna throw it, but you're not throwing it 35 times a game. You're gonna throw it 25 to 30 times a game. And Rodgers had let it be known he's not happy about that. And but they come out throwing, and they whitewash a very good defense and destroyed them from the opening drive. So I was interested. He surprised me in a good way, because I'm sort of concerned that maybe he's near the tail end. The other way was, again, I was expecting Le'Veon Bell to be a player, and in fact, I recommended that the Houston Texans go after a guy like him. But same old. I'm shocked. Being in the AFC, Patriots had played against him, I think 8 times. And he's a grinder. He's, in my opinion, of his little era, he's a different kind of back, but in my opinion, he was the best, or top 2 or 3. And this is another year of him just looking disinterested. Now, it's only one game, but in the Jets too. I'm down on the Jets. I'm down on him. They let Adams go. Adams was a mess, but those two right there was those two sort of I had thoughts both ways with them.
Yeah, and obviously we had a disappointing opener here in Indianapolis, although I don't think there was a big surprise. The weaknesses that the Colts showed were weaknesses that were concerns coming in. The defense playing too not aggressively enough, allowing things to be far too easy. Gardner Minshew looked like a dad on Thanksgiving morning playing catch with his sons in the front yard. 19 to 20 is a ridiculous number. You can't allow that to happen. And then Phillip Rivers throwing a couple interceptions. I feel like in that situation, if you're going to let Phillip Rivers throw the football 46 times, it's sort of like feeding a mogwai after midnight. Something bad's going to happen. You don't question that. It's just how bad is the damage going to be. I think the Colts were out of character. They didn't run the ball the way that they want to. They didn't establish the kind of mentality that they want to establish. They end up losing to a Jacksonville team that is likely going to have a top 5 pick when all is said and done. So I would say they're probably the disappointing team, although I think you could see some of that coming for me. I would say probably the team that I was most impressed by. Again, it wasn't shocking to me, but to see Baltimore come out and pick up almost exactly where they left off, score 38 points against a Browns team that, again, has high hopes and, again, seems to be falling short of those standards. But for them to come out and seem like they didn't miss a step, Lamar Jackson continuing to build on what he's done. And as you said, John Harbaugh, the experience that he has, the ability that he's shown with that team to be adaptable and to come out and take circumstances as they are. I think the Ravens made a statement in week 1 in that way. What are you looking forward to in week 2?
So I'm going to watch Kansas City. I'm going to see if because what happens is, and I go back to the Patriots' first Super Bowl win in 2001. They had a big game against the Steelers to open Gillette Stadium right after that, and they looked fantastic, just like Kansas City did last week. I was very, look, I know a lot about the Texans. Head coach Bill O'Brien is from a couple miles from here where I live right now, so I know a little bit about that team and the coaching staff. He's got another coach on the team from Andover as well. So I was, I'm just interested in Kansas City. I think they looked like they were ready to win the Super Bowl. Again, this is going to take 2 or 3 weeks. It's hard. The hardest part about what happens when you win a Super Bowl, it's not just you have the talent, because they got 20 of 22 starters back, but it's commitment. The Super Bowl is a commitment. It starts in the offseason and it goes forward. Maybe the fact that they didn't have a long offseason, that it wasn't a grind, maybe that will help Kansas City where they can just play. They have 20 guys, like I said, that started a year ago that are up to 22 on offense and defense. So that's going to they basically understand very little extra coaching. The same coaching staff is there. So I will say I'm going to watch them the next 2 weeks and see if there's a slight drop off. And then Houston Texans, that they get the Ravens. I sort of feel for them. I think they're going to take a little time here. But going forward, I think week 2 is big because we're going to find. Again, it's more like a month, but the trend is you better win and lose, or lose, win, and not get in that. When I say you don't want to win and then lose, but we want to see what trends start, and that's what I'm looking for this September, the trends, and that's how I'm gonna. I watched Dallas. Like I said last night, I'm ready to throw Dallas in the 8-8 category. I'm ready to throw, in fact, that whole division. I'm ready to throw Washington. Washington doesn't impress me at all. They impressed me with the resiliency yesterday, and they looked good. But they're a 7-9 team. Philadelphia, 8-8 team. New York Giants, who knows? We'll find out a little bit about them tonight. So, what I'm looking for are trends, and it's harder to pick the NFL. I know, George, we've talked about this before. The NFL isn't like it used to be. There were 4 teams that could win the Super Bowl. There's probably now about 8, maybe 9, and that could change. I think this year with the COVID, this might be a 10-6, 9-7 team that gets the 6th seed that just goes on a little roll. This is a different year. That's why I like the Patriots, and I normally wouldn't, and I normally didn't. But with Belichick, with a good defense, Cam Newton above average. Maybe as good as Brady was a year ago, I think they got a chance. So that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for trends this September. And I'm not even ready to say Cam Newton's a stud. I think we'll know more about a month. They got Kansas City, and we'll know that. And then they got Seattle this week. So a month in, they'll have two very difficult games. They're probably going to be 2-2. I'm more interested to see how they look going 2-2.
Absolutely. I think you mentioned Houston. That's a murderer's row for them at the start. Their first month of the season is absolutely horrific in terms of scheduling. A nightmarish start for them, and we'll see how they are able to withstand that and how they come out the other end. I'm excited to see how these races start to shape out. Probably the team I'm most interested in week 2 is Tampa Bay. Bruce Arians obviously was here in Indy for a little while, still well-liked here for the job that he did in that fairy tale 2012 season when Chuck Pagano had leukemia and was gone for most of the year. I know that he's a guy who won't accept what he saw in week 1. And I know it's going to take some time, as you talked about. A new quarterback, a new system. It's going to take some time down there. I'm interested to see how quickly things come along for the Bucs.
Well, I think it's Carolina, so they better win that game, and they better look good too. The one thing I noticed about that game, and I thought they were going to start a little slow. I picked them to beat New Orleans, but in retrospect, that probably was a dumb pick. But I'm looking to see his relationship with Mike Evans. It looked like Mike Evans wanted no part of Brady, and Brady wanted no part of him. He's a very talkative. He's basically a diva wide receiver, and it's not easy. And I could say the same thing for Peyton Manning. It's if you're great and you listen and you do everything you're told, it's great. But if you sort of like to do your own thing, you're not one of Brady's receivers. You know what happens when you're not one of Brady's receivers? He doesn't even look at you. So Mike Evans didn't look good. Something was up there, and he dropped the ball. He was shaking his head on the sidelines. Basically a nothing day for him. So I'm really interested. And I think Tampa's going to be very good this year. I said 12-4. Maybe that's a little high, but I still think they're going to be very good. I know how competitive Brady is, and they do have incredible weapons. They're all in this year to go for the Super Bowl. I don't know if they're going to get it, but they're all in for it. They're not going to be a 9-7 team. They're going to be. It was 7-9 a year ago with the most interceptions and most interceptions in the NFL last year with Jameis Winston. So I'm still bullish on Tampa for now.
Absolutely. Obviously, there's a lot of storylines to follow this year. It's going to be one of the more unpredictable, unprecedented years in NFL history. We are looking forward to checking in with you each week. I know there's going to be plenty to talk about every week when we have this spot.
Yeah, I was hoping the Colts. I'm a big fan of Frank Reich. His game plan against the Patriots in the Super Bowl, that was as good as it gets. And we saw some of that last year. But then all of a sudden, you had all the injuries at quarterback, and you lost a potential top 5, top 10 quarterback. He just retires on you. But the Colts interest me because I want to see the Colts win. There is something about what happened with the Patriots and them for the first decade of the 2000s. So I'm going to follow the Colts very closely over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I wonder too. I want to get your take on this. I wonder. I didn't really look at the road home split that closely, but I wonder if it was a tougher week 1 for road teams than usual, simply because you hadn't even gone on the road for a preseason game. How many of these guys had been out of quote unquote their bubble, that training camp atmosphere that they had? I don't know. I think that doesn't excuse the loss to Jacksonville. Don't get me wrong. There's no way that the Colts should have lost that game on Sunday. That's absolutely unforgivable. But I do wonder, road teams in general early in the season, it feels like this is a different kind of a year than in every way, but particularly in teams traveling. I wonder your thoughts on that.
So my thinking was, look, if there's no fans, it was 4th and 1. I wrote about this. In fact, I'm writing a column for CNHI that's going to come out tomorrow. I wrote a column that it was 4th and 1, fourth quarter, and I'm listening. I sat in the stands because I wanted to get a little different feel for it. And I hear Ryan Fitzpatrick pointing at everyone. Yeah, I mean, I'm literally 100 yards away in the end zone seats. He's not supposed to hear himself think. And that's part of the advantage, the home field advantage. And the Foxborough is one, just like the Colts have always had one, just like Kansas City, just like Pittsburgh, just like the 12th man in Seattle. So I would assume that it's easier. But this is a weird time. And maybe a month from now, when teams are used to traveling, where it doesn't matter, and then all of a sudden you don't have the fans, or you have maybe 10,000 fans. That's not really a home field advantage. So I think that advantage I think you're onto something. I think with the travel and with the weirdness of what's going on, I think it's going to be more like 2 or 3 weeks from now. We're going to see the home advantage might not be there as much.
It's going to be a very interesting year. Thanks a lot for your time, Bill. We'll talk to you again next week.
Great stuff, George. Thanks for everything.
Thanks again to Bill Burt of CNHI Sports Boston for joining us. You can follow all of Bill's Patriots coverage at Burt Talks Sports on Twitter, and you can follow him in print and online with the North Andover Eagle Tribune. Now, let's shift our focus a little bit to the college football scene. We're going to bring in Kevin Brockway of CNHI Sports Indiana and Elton Hayes of CNHI Sports Pennsylvania. Talk a little bit about the big news this week coming out of the Big Ten. Let's get to the big news of the show now and welcome in Kevin Brockway of CNHI Sports Indiana and Elton Hayes of CNHI Sports Pennsylvania, our Big Ten writers. Quite the week for you fellas out there with the conference coming back now. But first, Kevin, can you tell everybody a little bit how long you've been here and kind of what your duties are with CNHI Sports?
Yeah, I've been here 14 months and covering primarily the Indiana beat, also helping out a little bit with Purdue and, Big Ten related stories and the NCAA. So a little bit of Pacers too, kind of a hodgepodge, but mainly Indiana. And it's been 14 months. It's been an exciting time to say the least, particularly the last few months with some of the closures of the pandemic. But we've certainly learned to be versatile, but it's nice to have football back.
Elton, I know you're out there in State College. Can you talk a little bit about what your duties are and how long you've been on board with us?
Well, I joined CNHI in July of 2019, kind of got started right away with Big Ten Media Day, got to meet Kevin and jumped into football season. Everything seemed to be going well, transitioned over to basketball, and then the pandemic hit. And that is really just, knocked me off my groove. I felt like I was kind of just, getting entrenched into the beat, meeting people, just kind of getting a better lay of the land. And, just like Kevin is experiencing down in Indianapolis or down in Indiana, things have just kind of gone to a halt. But, it's a very interesting beat. A lot of sports up here to cover. It looks like we might be headed that way here next month.
Yeah, huge news from the Big Ten on Wednesday. They're going to come back, I believe, October 23rd and 24th. The first games will be played. But there's a tight window here, right, guys? No bye weeks. I think 5% positivity rate on any roster. You've got to shut down. What's the feeling right now as the Big Ten starts to put the pieces together to come back to the playing field?
Yeah, I think it's going to be, interesting to see how they pull it off. But I think there is a little bit of optimism in the fact that some other teams have gotten started. Now, there have been some postponements and cancellations around the country. But I think, Jeff Braun brought this up too. I mean, teams are going to have to stay diligent, off the field activities. You got to be really careful because you don't want to hit that 5% positivity rate. We do know that the Midwest is a current hot spot in terms of infections. So I think players are going to have to be really careful in monitoring their off-the-field actions. And, asking that for 18 to 22-year-old college kids is not an easy ask.
Yeah, I agree with Kevin. This is going to take I know Penn State has been preaching since the student-athletes arrived back on campus, being accountable, following the guidelines. Don't put yourself in positions where you could be exposed or you kind of breach that protocol. And with them playing, 9 games in 9 weeks, there's, like Kevin said, there's not much room for error. I know the Big Ten championship game and the +1 game is scheduled for December 19th. The college football playoff selection is scheduled for the 20th. So, none of the league teams or the coaches or players want to do anything to get over that 5% positivity rate and have to have a game canceled or postponed and possibly miss out on getting a spot for the college football playoff.
One more point to that I think that's interesting is they could have tried to rush and maybe start the season a week sooner to get that wiggle room, but then you cut down camp. And I think that's the second concern is ramping back up, soft tissue injuries, things of that nature. So it was kind of, I think, an interesting dilemma that they had. Do they rush it? I heard Jerry DiNardo on another radio show earlier this week. My friend Jim Coyle's radio show said he thought 2 to 4 weeks was a good timeline to, get reacclimated and get re-ready. But that's going to be another interesting aspect, too, to see the first couple of weeks, the quality of football and also the injury factor in terms of, how guys are going to be able to ramp back up, in the middle of October when their bodies aren't normally conditioned for that.
And college football in that sense too, because you have every game counts kind of mentality. I mean, obviously, you lose one game, the playoff might be out of the picture for you. You lose two, it definitely is. But this year, I wonder, from a Big Ten standpoint, not only do you have that condensed schedule, not only are the Big Ten teams going to be playing their first games when the rest of the country is in week 4, 5, or 6, but you're not going to have those ramp-up kind of contests. You're not playing Eastern Michigan to start the season. You're not playing, any of these MAC schools or smaller schools. Of course, that didn't work so well for the Big 12 last week, but we'll leave that for another time. Is there concern from coaches? Because, week 1, you're coming out, you don't know what you've got. You don't have any kind of preseason, work, and you're going right into conference play. These games are going to be big games right from the start.
Yeah. I think that's a good point. I know as far as Penn State's concerned, in the offseason, Penn State brought in 4 new assistant coaches, including Kirk Shiraka as offensive coordinator. These guys didn't have that, that traditional spring period to work with the players, the summer, and then the offseason, training. So like you said, they're jumping in right into it from game 1. As we've seen the first couple of weeks with some of these teams playing these out-of-conference schedules, the brand of football hasn't been that pretty. And, that's to be expected when you have such an unconventional lead up into the season. And it's going to be interesting for the Big Ten. There's, like you said, no room for error. And you're going to have to play – you have to be on your P's and Q's from game 1.
That's interesting, Elton, because, Indiana has a new offensive coordinator as well. The difference is he's from inside. He was promoted as a tight end coach. So there is a little bit of continuity there. Purdue, meanwhile, brings in a new defensive coordinator from the outside, Bob Diaco, who had a lot of success at Louisiana Tech. But still, that's the staff changes. That's another aspect to this that's going to be interesting to see the chemistry and the quality of football, which, I think we saw in week 1 as George alluded to a lot of upsets, Louisiana and Arkansas State knocking off a couple of Big 12 teams in Kansas State and Iowa State. So I think that's going to be interesting to watch as well.
I think football coaches are an interesting lot by nature. Most of them, I think they could solve world hunger with their system. There's nothing they can't do. Their way of doing things is the only way of doing things, and there's nothing that can penetrate, that locker room once they're together. They can beat anything. Do you sense that kind of mentality coming from them now as it pertains to the coronavirus?
Yeah. I know that, they preach we have our system, we can control what we can control, and we're not going to worry about what else is out there. As long as we do things our way, then, we're going to put ourselves in the best possible situation to succeed. And that's all good and dandy. But, I don't think any of us has ever seen the likes of, planning that around a global pandemic. So
I would say the same thing at Jeff Brom. I sense a little bit more humility from Tom Allen in terms of like the virus and, how it can derail things and just being adaptable. It was interesting. Tom Allen, even in August, before the first shutdown, discussed having a depth chart. And he said he had depth charts even for coaches because they were concerned about an offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator, coming down with the virus and having to be quarantined. And I mean, you're talking about a 21-day lag for players. This is really going to test, I think, the depth chart of a lot of teams throughout the country, particularly if you have some infections, and then of course if you have the 5%, then your whole team is shut down.
You mentioned 21-day lag. This, as I understand it, one of the guidelines, if a player tests positive with the point of contact testing, they're going to go to the more in-depth kind of version of this, and if that is confirmed, am I correct? 3 weeks before they can get back on the field, no matter what happens in between.
That's possible, yeah, and that could happen. That's the worst case scenario. And then what do you do about the games? I mean, do you count them as forfeits, or do you just say, hey, look, we had a 5-0 season or a 6-0 season? And that's another thing I think that the Big Ten office is going to have to shake out here in the coming weeks.
I wonder, from a football standpoint in particular, I know the all fall sports, it sounds like there's some hints all fall sports are coming back, and we'll probably get into that in the coming weeks as more announcements are made there. But football in particular, almost all of these schools have these giant luxury facilities where they work out, where their locker rooms are, where the practice facilities, the practice field is. They've got a home away from home in a lot of ways. Do you think the coaches are going to kind of steer players more to those buildings to kind of keep them where they know what's going on more often? Will there be more things like movie marathons, Call of Duty game sessions? Are there ways to keep the football team together in a bubble of sorts on campus, I guess?
I that would make sense. I know that, these guys don't want them kind of, I guess, crossing that red line between, campus, normal campus life and, what they're able to control inside those, quote unquote football bubbles. But I think you would see more of a push for players to get those guys kind of, quarantined in those type of areas where, they're just around each other. They like I said, they certainly have enough amenities to keep them, occupied and busy without risking them getting bored and wanting to, trek over to the downtown areas or, the off-campus things.
The one thing I've noticed about college athletes in my training, I've been covering, I used to cover the Florida Gators, so I've been covering college athletics now for close to 20 years. I think this generation is a little more mature and a little more less into the nightlife and going out. I remember a story once Chris Chioza played for the Gators. I asked him what he did to celebrate after he hit the game-winning shot. He said, I just stayed in and played Fortnite. I'm like, what happened to going out and hitting the town and stuff? But I think these younger athletes are a lot more responsible and a lot more reserved. And I think that's shown so far because, with the other conferences, we have seen some instances of cancellations. We haven't seen really too many major outbreaks. I think, these athletes are taking it seriously, and I think they're to be commended for that.
I'd be remiss if I didn't throw in one more question on the way out as I stand here in Indiana. Obviously, basketball is king. It kind of got lost in the sea of news on Wednesday because the Big Ten's big announcement, but college basketball also announced they're coming back. What do you guys know about that quickly? October
14th will be the first practice, and November 25th is the start date. And it's going to be interesting from an Indiana perspective because, the Maui Classic was scheduled to start November 23rd. That's going to be moved. They're talking about maybe Asheville, North Carolina, or possibly Indianapolis as being a site for that. So it'll be interesting to see how those developments unfold in the coming weeks.
All right, guys, thanks a lot for your time, and we'll check in with you every week here. Sounds like there's a lot of interesting storylines to follow in the weeks ahead.
Thanks, George. Thanks, Kevin.
Thanks, George.
Thanks again to Kevin and Elton for joining us. You can follow Kevin on Twitter at Kevin Brockway G1. You can follow Elton on Twitter at EHDC12. Both of those guys obviously have a lot on their plate coming up. The Big Ten, still a fluid situation. It should be really fun checking in with them throughout the season. Now we're going to shift focuses once again. We're going to go out to the Plains, to CNHI Sports Oklahoma, and welcome in Clay Horning. Now it's our pleasure to welcome to the show Clay Horning of CNHI Sports Oklahoma. Clay, would you like to explain to everybody how long you've been in your current position and just some of the long list of responsibilities that you have?
Well, sure. I have a tendency to speak at length, so cut me off if you want. But anyway, I've been in Norman since March 7th of 97. And in that time, 3 Final Fours, several national championship games, a lot of state, championship games as well, cover sort of everything. I was sports editor from 04 to 19 or 04 to 18. And then sort of moved over to the position that we call senior sports columnist. But when I did that, I also became the beat writer for the Thunder, and now still keep track of the Thunder, but still cover OU football, still cover preps, still do everything. So that's what we're doing.
Yeah, definitely keeps you busy. Never a dull moment, it sounds like. Seems like this would be a really interesting year in particular to be on an NBA beat. Obviously, the bubble down in Disney World, it seems to have worked, seems to be working, really got them back on track, allowed them to march towards a championship. What was that experience like from a media standpoint, especially from somebody outside of the bubble trying to peer in and cover what was going on here in this end of the regular season and the start of the playoffs for the Thunder?
Well, the truth would probably be that it was horribly easy because you could, get out of bed and 10 minutes later be talking to Billy Donovan, which may or may not have happened. But anyway, you could do that. You don't get the great NBA meals any longer in that situation because you're no longer at the gym. But anyway, freebies aside, it wasn't difficult. I thought it was an interesting sort of thing to watch. I'm a little bit surprised the Thunder didn't pull out Game 7. They had been so good in the clutch, best team in the league in the clutch, which is defined as games within 5 points in the final 5 minutes. And Chris Paul had been the best player in the league in the clutch. And they'd won, they were tied 3-3, having won 3 games in the clutch. And then Game 7 was the same situation, but they didn't even get the shot off. Would you like to know? I can give you your next question. Here would be the issue facing all of the NBA right now is nobody knows what the salary cap is going to be next season. Nobody knows what the luxury tax threshold is going to be. You might recall that the Houston Rockets owner put out a tweet that was sort of backing the freedom movement in Hong Kong, which really made the Chinese angry and made some NBA players angry until they realized they were coming out against freedom by being angry. But so anyway, so lack of revenue coming from China is an issue. Just lack of revenue as a result of the pandemic is an issue. I mean, everybody missed 10-ish home games, as a result. And to say nothing of revenue that they would have had if they'd been playing playoff games in their own arenas. So, and that's especially big for a team like Oklahoma City because they've been over the cap quite a bit, but they don't like staying there. And it's sort of unclear where they want to go right now because they've got so many players. Are they going to do the full rebuild and tear it down, or are they going to sort of put out the team like they had this season, next season, still with Chris Paul and Dennis Schroeder and Steven Adams? Or do they just sort of start over because they sure had the draft picks to go that route and try to be good in a 3 seasons?
Yeah, they're also one of the teams. The Pacers are in that group too, looking for a head coach now. Kind of a mutual parting of the ways, as I understand, with Billy Donovan. How unique is that going to be? You mentioned the salary cap constraints. There's obviously, as there is in the country as a whole, not just the NBA. There's a lot of uncertainty about what the next steps are. As of this moment, there isn't even a declared date for next season to begin.
Oh, I know. It would
going to hold a coaching search at this time.
Well, I would say yes and no. I mean, the last we heard from anybody was the night of the announcement that Billy would not be coming back. Sam Presti, general manager, also on a Zoom call or a Microsoft team, whatever the heck. But anyway, a digital call, spoke about it. And I thought the biggest news coming out of that was he kind of in an offhanded way said, well, we could bring back the same team next season. But we still don't, but we can't know about the season after that and the season after that. And we can't tell Billy. And that's what Billy wants to know. We're not in a position to tell him. And so even that he sort of offhandedly said we could come back with the same team, I thought was real news. So because Chris Paul is owed $86 million over the next 2 seasons, and Schroeder and Dennis Schroeder, second in Sixth Man of the Year voting, and Steven Adams, the center, both would be entering the final years of their contract next season. Danilo Gallinari is a free agent, but I don't know that anybody wants to sign anybody long term, and whatever this offseason is, however long it lasts, because typically the NBA season I think begins in October, and they're still we don't know who's in the finals yet, and it's September. So yes, all this craziness is going on, and for Oklahoma City, I actually asked Billy. I was pleased. I thought I actually got him to give me a decent answer, which was, "Do you have to make roster decisions and then hire a head coach?" And he said he didn't know. And then I said, "Well, mention the first thing you do, hiring a coach, and then figuring it out." And he said, I wish I could tell you, I don't know. And I believe he doesn't know. So if there's somebody they really like and that person says, I love what you're doing in Oklahoma City, I know it's in a rebuild of some kind, but whether you come back with Chris Paul next season or we tear it down, I'm on board. Maybe a coach could be hired quickly. If you can't find somebody like that or somebody you really like that, because Sam is only going to get somebody he really likes, then we'll have to see what the roster decisions are. So that's sort of where we are.
We know there's a lot of uncertainty with the NBA, as we talked about. Norman, obviously a huge college football town. One thing we know about Oklahoma under Lincoln Riley, they're going to have star quarterbacks. Those quarterbacks are probably going to go to New York, be part of the Heisman Trophy ceremony. What did you see from Spencer Rattler in the opener, the latest star quarterback for the Sooners?
Well, he looked real good. I mean, the column I wrote afterwards was we don't know how good he is. We can't know how good he is given the opponent, but he was as good as he possibly could have been against that opponent. That was the idea. It was 14-17. I think it was for 290 yards and 4 touchdowns, no picks. But the bigger situation for Oklahoma is that about 30 players were not on the sidelines and about 20 that are on the 2 deep were not in uniform. And only about 3 of those did we know of, injuries or off-season suspensions that carried into the season. So clearly, whether a number of players came down with the virus or a number of players were the victims of contact tracing of the virus, a lot of players were out. And, Spencer Rattler could be out next week, not because he is careless, because he was next to the wrong person. So you just don't know. And given that, it's sort of very interesting because Tanner Mordecai, who was the second team quarterback, who he was in a quarterback competition with prior to the season, who was not the ballyhooed prospect that Spencer was, but was a pretty good prospect. He came in and did all right, but he threw, I don't know, for a national audience, if they can remember the quality of interceptions that Landry Jones used to throw, but he threw a Landry Jones special and, just right to the other team. He actually looked like he was throwing away from his guy to the defender, and it was in the end zone. And so if the Sooners have to ride 1 week with Tanner Mordecai or conceivably whoever's behind him to play, well, I think if they play Iowa State, Kansas State, or Texas Tech, given what they did, or Kansas, Texas Tech won, but only by 2 points over Houston Baptist. If they can but if they've got to face West Virginia or Oklahoma State or Texas without Rattler, or that becomes a whole new ball game. And what we also know is we're not going to know until the Saturday of that week if that's the case, because Lincoln Riley has made it clear that he's not telling us. So yeah, and it makes me wonder just how that can be the state of the information flow and keep. What I'm trying to say is, and games don't come off the board at every sports book in the country because we honestly don't know. And I don't know if college football's ever thought about. The NFL, they report everything just so they can be accurate. We're losing some of our audience if we hold this in. So I don't know if that's a thought, but it is interesting because nobody knows who's going to play week to week right now.
That's absolutely interesting. The way it unfolded, obviously from the outside looking in, it was really Saturday morning when it started to come out reports that Oklahoma had a serious number of players on their roster who weren't going to be available. And then obviously
I don't think it's unique. I don't think it's unique at all, but it is the case. And you may know, others may know, I'm trying to write a national column every week, and the one that will come out in a couple of days is about this wacky college football season. And that was a piece of what I wrote about it. And sort of one of the things I sort of closed with was the experience inside the stadium was very different because it's 20,000 people, not 88,000 people in pods of like 2, 4, and 8 people together. But on the way in, it was pretty familiar going down sorority and fraternity row and, a bunch of 18 to 22-year-old young men and women It's an absolute social event any game day. Even if they're not going into the stadium, they're all in close quarters with one another. They're having a beer, they're playing cornhole, they're doing whatever they're doing. Nobody's wearing a mask. So anyway, keep the players away from the Greek.
The rest of the campus. That's one thing I was going to ask. What is the atmosphere kind of in Norman right now? I know the fans, it has to be very odd. You don't have the information you normally would. You don't have the number of fans in the stadium, but there is football being played, and obviously other parts of the country, they can't say that right now. What's the feeling in Norman?
Well, I think that, I don't know exactly, because I don't think most people are thinking, this is crazy, week to week winner who's going to be out there. I think they're thinking, OU won its first game. It's an odd season. Now it's just conference games remaining, but they ought to be favored in every game. And I don't think anybody thinks if they roll through the conference and win a Big 12 title game and go to I was going to say BCS, but now it's CFP, College Football Playoff, and roll into the college football playoff. Whoever, if that game gets played, if it's not canceled on Friday, or probably be played on a Monday, if it's not canceled on a Sunday before they play it, there's a national championship will still be a national championship in everybody's eyes. It's a little bit devalued, but it's going to go on the back of everybody's scoreboard or wherever they put it in the stadium, and nobody's going to think, that wasn't a real one. So, I think everybody is excited about the possibility to win a national title. It's eluded OU. They've been to, Joe is right here next to me. They've been to 3 straight or 4 out of 5. What is it?
4 again.
They've been to 4 out of 5 BCSs or college football playoffs. Have yet to play in a title game. But at any rate, if they were to do that, people would go gaga for it as usual. They'd probably all party together, and there'd be another COVID spike.
Have a whole other set of problems on your hands.
Yeah, what are you going to do?
Nobody's going to give back any wins. That's for certain. There's no question about that. Clay, thanks for your time, and we'll check in with you periodically throughout the year.
All right. I appreciate it. Enjoyed it.
Thanks again to Clay for his time. As you can see, he's on top of a whole ton of things out there in the Plains. It should be a very interesting offseason for the NBA, however long that lasts. And it obviously is going to be a very interesting season for the Oklahoma Sooners, the Big 12, and really all of college football. If you enjoyed what you saw today, and really who wouldn't, check back with us every week here as we go inside the game with the CNHI experts. Thanks again. We'll see you again next week.